What's up? Hey, hello, everyone. Wow, happy Thanksgiving for everyone who has celebrated. That is why we were having a little bit later podcast than usual. But what an amazing Survivor episode of Survivor Season 37, David versus Goliath. Now the Davids are having the same numbers as the Goliaths. So my name is Rachel.
And I'm Alyssa, and I know that at the beginning of this season, we were like, oh, we don't want this to be like a whole David comeback story just because that feels like so forced. Except for I feel like there's no way that the season can end with a David winning without the whole like comeback story arc being a part of it. So I thought this episode was really great, both like as its own episode and within like the arc of the season. So I was really excited by this whole episode.
Yeah, which is really interesting because I feel like thus far the Davids have had the underdog story, tribe swap. It was all 3-2, and then they were able to manage their way through that. Come the merge, they were down numbers, and now we are finally seeing even footing after the first episode of Survivor with Pat's medevac. So it's so crazy how like this underdog story has been playing out so far, and it will be interesting to see now we're in the back half of the season where the season is going. And yeah, like you're saying, this 2-episode story arc of last week with the great idol play come this week with the vote steal and the idol nullifier play. So interesting. And the season has been like really good considering it technically still has been like David versus Goliath, and we haven't really seen the cross tribal lines that much. But I think coming next week, we will definitely see some mixing and mashing of these people.
Yeah, what I thought was really interesting was that I think this was the first time that a vote steal has been like played correctly. Though I guess you could argue that it wasn't really played correctly because they, depending on whether Allison was going to vote for Angelina or Dan, yeah, it might not have made that much of a difference. So
yeah, I think it depends on how you look at it. We'll definitely talk about it when we get to like the whole tribal council portion, but they guaranteed who they wanted to go home was going home by playing both of the advantages at this tribal council. And I think production was probably like so freaking excited watching this play out. And they're like, dang, finally the advantages that we're putting into the season are finally working, and people are like playing them quote unquote correctly.
yeah, and I thought it was interesting too because the first time the idol nullifier has ever been used, it was used correctly, which is super great. And I think it was great for the Davids too. But like you said, we can talk more about that later.
Yeah, so starting with Christian finds a hidden immunity idol. Go, Christian. I think it's interesting how we saw all of the Davids wake up in the dark kind of thing, and then they go out searching for the idol, whereas the Goliaths we see are sleeping. And I feel like so many past seasons where you have the underdogs who are like the easy targets to get voted out, the people in the majority just sleep in, they lay there, and then they lose, or like that's their downfall because the people in the minority actually have like the need to go out and search for these advantages and idols and stuff like that. We've seen it with Mike, we've seen it with Ben, who they just happen to like make it to the end because they have the need to go out, whereas the majority doesn't, and then that's their downfall. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, the thing about being in the minority is that you're always like working harder instead of resting on your laurels. And I think it would be really interesting to see what like a majority player could do if they didn't just be satisfied in the fact that they were in the majority. Just because I feel like so many times, like you said, the majority players just rest. And I think we saw that in Heroes, Healers, Hustlers too, because that was kind of what allowed Ben to get his idols.
Yeah, and so maybe it's like the Wendell Dom, that's when the majority is hustling, and then it's like, I don't know. I feel like I would want to be in the underdog situation because you really don't have anything to lose. Like, yes, it's a harder end game. It's a harder way to get to the end, but you're always on your toes. Whereas if you're in the majority, you might feel like comfortable or stagnant. And so I think you see both sides of the coin with like Mike and Ben versus Wendell and Dom, who are like four really like powerful players, but some are in the minority and some are in the majority. And you see like where the differences lie.
Yeah. And I think part of what you said, like in the minority group has nothing to lose. That allows them to do crazier shenanigans because it's like, if I'm going to go home anyway, I might as well have gone home trying this weird ass stunt rather than the majority might be playing more conservatively, because if they play something wrong, then they might not be the majority anymore, which is like difficult.
Yeah, and like we've seen it so much with people even this season being like we're Goliath strong, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then we've also seen last season with like the whole Navidi strong crap. And so like if you have the numbers, you sort of push so hard to keep the numbers in your way that like you don't really, I guess, think of the other options. And we saw this episode with like Allison, who mentioned like 6 million times how she wants to flip, but in the end doesn't flip or do anything. But yeah, I think it was really cute. Christian's breath first search, which was also the title of this episode, makes a lot of sense. You know, you're searching a lot of places a little rather than a few places a lot, you know, not spending too much time in one spot. Makes sense. I think Christian's just so funny. He's like, the stringed coconut was there and like they pan to it. And then he's like, I don't see anything. I'm like, frick, Christian, like it's right there. You better find it. And then he's like, oh, like that doesn't naturally occur on the island. Haha. And he finds the idol. I think honestly, this is the best thing that could happen for Christian. He realizes he's a target for now and forever into this game. Plus, I feel like after this vote, especially, the more individual game is going to happen, more cross-tribal blurring. Hopefully, we'll see next week, which I think Christian will probably use it for himself as the more individual game is happening. But I think it could be bad that all of the Davids know about it now.
Yeah, I was going to say the whole powwow that the Davids had about all of their various advantages, I was like, yikes, you guys, that's putting a lot of trust into each other just because they're all being super open about their advantages and stuff like that. And like, it's fine and everything, I guess, as long as they're still together. But like, personally, I think it would have been better if Christian hadn't revealed that he had an idol. But also, that might have led to Carl not talking about the nullifier and Nick not talking about the steal a vote. And it's like, that is what they needed to talk about. So I'm kind of hoping that the Davids will stay together at this point, and then Christian will be able to use the idol on himself, and it'll be good, and he won't go home. But I feel like that's a little naive of me to think at this point. So,
yeah, I guess it's really interesting because you give some, you take some. So Christian telling the others solidifies their like 5-sum relationship. But I think it could be tricky because everyone realizes he is a threat. People are like, we do need to vote him out. But last week they had to save him because you don't want to just get pagonged as the Davids. But now knowing that he has some kind of other advantage, and it is going to start getting down to the nitty gritty of like 7 and 8 people left after like this week, honestly. So I think that could be the tricky thing because everyone knows Christian's a threat. No way. I feel like he can make it to the end and not have this huge uphill battle. I mean, which is sort of crappy because but yeah, I don't think he can make it to the end because everyone just realizes he's such a big threat.
Yeah, I think for Christian, playing the idol while if the Goliaths still go on their whole Goliath strong thing, playing the idol while he's still playing like as a part of the David team as opposed to playing it for himself and just himself is probably like the way to go to gain more favor, especially if he's not going to like where did my thought go? If he's not going to make it to the end and he wants to be remembered as like a cool survivor, it might be better for him if he has like an idol play, like to save the team under his belt. So
yeah, I think it was really interesting, the powwow, also because it happened after the immunity challenge. There's no mention of it up until like 35 minutes into the hour episode. And I was like, yo, like, it's almost time to go to tribal. We probably think this big idol play is going to happen, or like these big advantage play is going to happen at this episode. So many people are predicting that last week, and they didn't mention it until then. And I was like, that's so cute. You know, they're sharing their secrets. They're upset about the segregation of the Goliaths continuously lying to their faces, which I think is interesting because I feel like we haven't seen this much like sharing of advantages in a while, because I feel like typically people are very like keep what I have close to myself and don't share it with other people. So I guess it's really interesting how everyone is just so open, and I think that could be like, you know, evolution of strategy.
Yeah, I think it's questionable just because like I think that a lot of Survivor players get antsy when they don't get information until the last minute, because then they're like, oh my goodness, everything has to change. And like for the people who are more like neurotic, I feel like that's very difficult for them. But I do think that it could speak to like a strategy evolution that people are waiting so long to reveal these kinds of things. I think also though it might just be you want to make really sure before you say like, oh, I have an idol, or oh, I have an advantage, that you're actually going to be like needing it. Because like it would be stupid right now for the like Goliaths to tell each other that they have an advantage, because it's like, well, I don't need to tell you because we have a solid majority, so they think. So
Yeah, because I feel like with the Davids especially, they're forced to become closer because they are at a disadvantage with the numbers, and you're fighting from the bottom per se. And I think it's interesting because it's still like technically David versus Goliath. People are still voting in these blocks of their original tribes, but like the way that we have been seeing the episode, it's like strong tribal lines, but things are still happening that are against the tribal lines, which I think is really fun to watch. Definitely, probably not in the best interest of the Goliaths, obviously, because now they are at 5-5. I think next episode something could happen, but with a 5-5, like even split again, it's really tricky because you don't want to be one of the Goliaths. Say if Allison and Alec flip to vote out like I don't know, Mike or something. I don't even know. Like, who would you even target? Because there's so many like cross tribal things now, and then you're at a 5-4 disadvantage come the week after, or like the next tribal council. So it's really difficult. We want something to happen cross tribal lines, but if you think about it, I think the Davids have to stick together and the Goliaths have to stick together, because it seems like they're sort of forced to stick with their main tribal lines because of these like even numbers.
I think the thing is too with Davids and Goliaths, if they voted out one of their own and they were sure that it wouldn't become a David versus Goliath thing again, that would be fine. Like if they mixed up into different alliances and it was the two alliances against each other instead of the Davids against the Goliaths, that would be fine. But I don't think that's the way it's going to go, just because there hasn't been enough cross-tribe pollination to make like cross-tribe like official alliances. So like we have the strike force, but that's not really a thing, you know?
Because, like, what we're seeing is that the 5 Davids are tight. Preview, we see Gabby and Carl maybe having a brawl. But I think if you're playing smart and like the Goliaths have, even though Mike has said they like all dislike each other, you sort of need to stick together just for the numbers aspect. And then I think, yeah, this is skipping ahead, but even if those two with Gabby and Carl are brawling, you have with the Davids, you have so many options of who you can vote out on the Goliaths, because none of the Goliaths like each other. Angelina's going to be freaking pissed off that people wrote her name down as a contingency plan there. She's not going to want to work with the Goliaths. Like Allison and Alec, they'll be mad and stuff like that. And it's like Allison and Alec also have the connections with like Christian and Gabby and Nick, whereas also Mike has a connection with Nick. So like, who are they voting out? Kara out of the 5? But then Kara's close with Alec and Allison, so then it's really weird.
Yeah, it's like there's no obvious target of like if we want to get rid of one of our own without angering anyone else, like who would it be? Just because like it's gotten complicated because there are relationships, like personal relationships outside of alliances, and then there are alliances where people don't seem to really like each other. And so it's like a hot mess, basically.
Yeah, because I don't know. I would just be wary about making your original tribe, which is sort of annoying, but like making your David group down to a 5-4 minority again. I think that would be really nerve-wracking. And you would want to try to vote out a Goliath again next week. But if you're the Goliaths also, like, is making yourself the minority when you came into the merge in the majority, like, really a good move? Or like, are you all just being sort of shimmied along by the Davids at this point? Because I feel like with the vote steal and idol nullifier, like what has happened with Dan getting voted out is exactly what Allison and Kara and Alec were talking about all episode, but then they did nothing to like further that plan along. So like the Davids are getting all of this resume boosting crap, whereas the Goliaths are just sort of going with the flow and having their plans like executed in a sort of roundabout way.
It's like it's the same end that they were trying to avoid, but now they don't even get to take credit for it happening.
Yeah, so it's like they have sort of nothing because you go into the merge with a majority. Somehow you screw it up so much that maybe next week you could be in the minority if Christian plays the idol correctly or whatever, uses it for a fellow ally and votes out a Goliath. Then it's like, how did you screw up that badly? And then what do you have on your resume when you make it to the end? Like, I was semi like a David pawn throughout the second half of the game. But I don't know. I think vote steal and idol nullifier, at first, I was like, okay, great. You know, vote steal, you have a 6-5 advantage, and then you can vote out whoever. And then Nick stands up. He's like, I'm taking Allison's vote. And then I was like, okay, so then you're thinking about it. Who do you place your 6 votes on? And you like had the hunch that Dan has this second idol. How do you play it so that like you don't accidentally screw yourself and get someone idled out because Dan plays the idol? And I think with the plan that you use the idol nullifier and the vote steal concurrently, really, it just is like 100% guarantee of what is going to happen is like happening, because you could, yeah, put 6 votes on Kara or Allison, but we heard Dan ask Kara, like, do I play my idol for Allison? Do I play it for myself kind of thing? There's still some like not foolproof things with that plan. So if you use the idol nullifier correctly, like they did, and they had the hunch that Dan had a second idol, you know, you guarantee your plan is pretty much 100% happening. You don't know that like people were going to put votes on Angelina because they didn't know what was happening. So you can't really like factor that into like what might happen tonight.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting just because they were kind of doubly safe with their plan, because with the vote steal and the idol nullifier, they definitely made sure that someone they didn't like was going home. And I think it would have been a shame for them if they had stolen the vote and then the person had used an idol, because then it's like you're down one of the things in your arsenal and you're also down even further in numbers. So
yeah, because then Christian would have went home if Dan like played the idol correctly on whoever they were placing votes on, kind of thing.
And then Christian would have taken his idol with him, so it would have been like, well, we're really screwed. So even though it like got rid of a lot of their arsenal all at once, I think it was good for the Davids to play two of their 3 advantages at the same time.
Yeah, because then you like know the votes are going to be 5-5 versus trying to like maybe flush Dan's idol, and they were thinking of placing the votes on like Kara or Allison, but you don't know where Dan could play the idol for himself, for Kara or Allison. So like there's just too many like moving pieces with that plan. And so you got rid of 3 advantages in one fellow swoop, which is great, because I feel like in past seasons, once you get down to 5 or 6, you have like the idol get in or advantage get in, and like someone who doesn't even get any votes cast against them gets voted out. Oh, rip. Sorry. So I'm glad things are being used at like these larger numbers, and they aren't going to replace them with like 6 million more advantages, because just having Christian's one idol is good enough. I think when you have 5 or 6 things like floating around, it gets too complicated.
And it especially gets complicated because then you have to have a contingency plan for your contingency plan for your contingency plan, which is like, But I also think one of the interesting things is when you get rid of more of the advantages, it becomes more about like pure strategy and like, can we finagle it so we can continue getting the people we want out, even though we don't have all of these other things to assist us.
Yeah, I think I was so shook when they pulled the idol, when Jeff pulled the idol nullifier out, and he's like, blah, 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 doesn't say the votes cast against Dan doesn't count. And then he's like, this is the idol nullifier. I was like, wow, production must be so freaking excited that this stuff is being played and played correctly. Like,
just amazing. Imagine being Dan, though, because like he doesn't even know the idol nullifier exists. And then he has to like deal with it being played against him and being the reason that he goes home. Like,
I think it's so sort of sad. I think, you know, Dan did everything right. Technically, he played the idol on himself correctly. He thought he was getting votes, which was correct. He did get the majority of the votes, but then you can't guess that something brand new like the idol nullifier was going to nullify you out of the game. So I don't know. There's nothing really on the fault of Dan for getting voted out, which I don't know. I guess it's sort of sad, but then it's also like, it will be interesting. Like, what if you had 2 idols? And so if you still had 2, if you played the second one, would it still work? And then it's like, I don't know. How do you combat the idol nullifier? If someone plays that on you and you play an idol, you're like screwed. That would be the crappiest way to get voted out.
I mean, I think it just involves like a lot of misdirection because you could be like, oh, I'm playing my idol on Allison tonight. Like, if you can stage a conversation that doesn't seem staged, where you say like, oh, I'm playing my idol on this person tonight, and you like make it believable, and then they play the idol nullifier on that person. Like, it's a lot more about acting than I feel like any strategic thing you can do to do it.
Yeah, which is harder. Then you need to like think, oh, maybe an idol nullifier is in play this season. Maybe it's not in play this season. Who knows? Let's try to trick everyone. Yeah, I think Angelina's going to be pissed that she got 2 votes from people in her quote unquote alliance. You know, she better definitely realize that she's on the bottom of her group now because her teammates voted for her as a freaking black backup plan. So like, she better realize something this next week. Dan leaves the tribal council pissed off at Kara, maybe potential jury sway. I think it's interesting how this is what the Goliaths wanted with this episode, but they didn't do anything to get like the Dan vote out. And I think, I
think it's interesting too because like Kara wanted Dan out. Like you said, this was what she wanted, but at the same time, she didn't have anything to do with it. And like, I think that just frustrates me because it's like all of these people could have been on the same page. This could have been an epic blindside if Kara had like gone to the Davids and was like, we're going to do this for real. Because like they had some talk, but then no action. And this Allison. Do you want to talk about Allison? Because I just have like noises to make.
I think Allison says she wants to flip, but doesn't. Literally had 3 separate confessional group talks about it this episode, and she keeps on mentioning, I'm going to miss the boat if we don't get on it. There are like advantages going to be played. Like, I want to be on the right side of the numbers. I want the survivor resume. And then nothing happens. The majority or Allison isn't going to flip the script because they're too scared. She's like, I need to sit back and go with the flow now. You know, I need to stick Goliath strong. I'm like, what? She has all of these plans. Like, before the merge, she's talking with Gabby about doing this, like, Dan vote out, and everyone was like, oh, gung-ho, yes, Allison, like, let's see you flip the script. And then continuously she is saying that she wants to do something but never does it. And I'm like, is this going to be a Laurel 2.0? Why is nothing happening?
I thought it was really interesting because she said something like, sometimes the biggest move you can make is not to make a move. And I was like, what? Like, that's some galaxy brain stuff right there. Just like the way she said it, and I can't even track her thought process, where somewhere along the way she was like, you know what? Goliath strong is the best way to be. Like, I'm just so confused.
Yeah,
How did she get there?
I think like Dan, Mike, and Angelina are like the true Goliath strong people who we've seen like literally want to stay Goliath strong. Allison, Kara, and Alec are the like wishy-washy, maybe Goliath strong, maybe not Goliath strong. They're doing it because they have the majority in numbers. But then it's like, y'all missed the freaking ship. The ship has sailed, fam. I don't know. I'm like, why keep bringing it up if you aren't ever going to take action? And yes, like you're weighing all your possibilities, whatever, but it's just starting to get old. And I think we really see it this episode in Tribal where everyone's like, yeah, the Goliaths keep on lying to our faces. They say they're voting this way, but then they vote another way. Same with the Christian vote last week. Like, we want to work with you all, but they don't want to work with us, kind of thing. So it's like, it might be too late, but like I don't think it's too late. But after a certain point, if you keep saying you're gonna do something and never do it, like you can't expect the Davids to want to work with you after 3 times of like lying to their face about it.
Yeah, and good on the Davids for like pointing out exactly why their whole "we want to work with you" thing isn't real. Because it's like they said, oh, they're willing to work with us when it's a David going out, but not when it's a Goliath. And I was like, yes, preach. Just because like it frustrated me so much that the Goliaths keep acting like the victims when it's like, y'all are the ones who keep screwing up and not like sticking to your word. Like, you can't be mad at the Davids for being mad at you about that.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so hard to break these tribal lines. Like, you go into the merge having a majority, and you're sort of forced to stick with the people in the Goliath team, even though you dislike them, because you do have the majority. And I think that's what's screwing all of their games up. So maybe Mike should have kept Natalie and like, back in the pre-merge days, because he was so afraid of like screwing every Goliath's game over. But like at this point in time, what Goliath truly has a chance to win the game? I don't think, unless something crazy happens in the next few weeks or next few like tribal councils, for someone to get a good enough resume to beat one of the Davids. I think the Davids going to final tribal council, they probably should bring Goliaths to the end, because I think the people on the jury would respect the David like story arc of, I was on the bottom, we were in the minority, we fought, we used these advantages, we worked together as a team. It's just, you really can't go to final tribal council with someone too close of your ally, like with the Dom Wendell thing. Then it's just too hard to pick. So if like Davey goes to the end, maybe bring 2 Goliaths, because then those votes will cancel and he'll come out victorious, or like Nick or whoever. But I think if you go to the end, like Nick, Davey, Christian, how do you pick the winner out of that?
Yeah, I think that the only Goliath at this point that I could see maybe having an argument to win over David would be Angelina. And that's because she had a really strong game, I feel like, earlier in the game. But I'm not sure if she could win against a David at this point. But like you said, I feel like the Davids would definitely need to bring 2 Goliaths. Otherwise, they could end up like undermining each other, or being like, I did this all with my team. And then their team is like, so why are you the one here instead of us? So
yeah, then it's like you get Stephen Fish backed and just who's more likable gets more votes at the end. And then it's like, how do you compare if you worked together on every single vote? It was like an equal partnership. It's like Dom and Wendell 2.0. I think with Angelina, it would be very difficult, because we're not exactly sure how much social capital she has. I think she is playing a good game and she is able to like scrape by in these votes, even though like maybe her teammates don't necessarily like her or want to work with her, but are forced to work with her. She's been on the chopping block for the past like 2 or 3 votes, similar to Christian. So it's definitely an uphill battle for both of them to make it to the end, but I think would her peers give Angelina $1 million if they don't necessarily like her on the personal level? It'd be interesting to see if like people are able to get past the bitterness of like, I dislike Angelina because she's snaky, or it's like Angelina played a good game, like kind of thing.
Yeah, like Angelina's snakiness might be the reason that you don't like her, but it also might be the reason that she's most worthy of winning.
Yeah, I think Kara wanting to cut Dan, we see it multiple times this episode. She's like, he's holding me back at this certain stage of the game. It's not easy to cut ties. I have to separate myself from him if I want to win this game. So she wants Kara, Alec, and Allison to be the 3 to flip. I'm like, bye, Mike. You're replaced on the strike force, I guess. Kara tells them Dan has the second idol. I think this would have been like a perfect insurgency plan. Let's get 5, 6, 7, 8 votes on Dan, and we can vote Dan out or like make him not play the idol or kind of thing. But then they don't do anything about it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that this whole thing, like, it would have been even cooler. Like, I still think this was a great episode, and like the tribal council was great, but I think it would have been even cooler if there was more participation from the Goliaths.
Yeah, it's just 5 people making the vote. Like we're saying, are the Goliaths just being semi-dragged along at this point? It will be interesting to see next week, like what is actually happening. We see Davy gets John's jacket. That was so funny. How the jacket thing just keeps coming up. I mean, I don't know. I think it will be interesting to see what happens next week, whether it stays like 5-5 split and they are forced to like try to make a move kind of thing, because I would just be so nervous if you are going to accidentally lose your numbers and go 5-4 when people seemingly are very gung-ho about their original tribal lines.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, everything you just said. I think my favorite thing was talking about the jacket, though, just because we saw so much drama over Natalie's jacket and then John's jacket. Like, it came up again. These people in their jackets, man, they're crazy.
Yeah, I think best bet, you want to bring like Allison and Kara maybe to the final 3, because they would definitely semi-cancel each other out. They both are thinking along the same lines of like, we need to make an insurgency but never get to the insurgency. So if you're the David there, you could be like, they're like, oh, we want to make all these big moves, but I'm the David that actually made the big moves. But I think those 2 are good speakers. I think Mike is a good speaker. Alec just has a very like out there personality that can be sort of over dominating. So I think I wouldn't want to bring him to the end, because he just would like, he just has, you know, like that aura that's like very dominating. So that wouldn't be good, because he probably wouldn't get a lot of talking time. Angelina could be good to bring to the end too, but I think she's a good speaker as well.
Yeah.
And has more merits about like her game than I think Allison and Kara.
Yeah, I think if Alec were to go to tribal council, his main thing would just be he was super good at challenges, as we saw this episode. Like,
yeah, I think that Alec is like the main challenge beast left. We saw Dan and then John go home. Dan and Alec were neck and neck at the immunity challenge. Alec did the puzzle with Kara, which won the reward challenge for them. So I think that could be an issue for him. And so he could get booted because of that. And then everyone else is sort of on like semi-equal, non-athletic footing. I think Kara's really good at challenges also. But no Davids have won an immunity challenge yet. So you have to even it out.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting just because like the puzzle in the reward challenge was something that once again, the Davids couldn't do, because Christian was the like main person and he couldn't get it. So I really hope a David wins an immunity challenge someday. I feel like that would be really nice for the Davids. Like, oh, we have one less person to worry about saving.
Yeah, and then if you have 4 people on the chopping block because one wins immunity next week, then it's sort of like, oh, go to rocks potentially. You have the upper hand because there's less of you. And then you risk it for the biscuit, which I think it would be interesting if they do go to rocks. I don't know. It could potentially happen because I feel like people are so steadfast, but
It would be
I wouldn't
lit
risk
if we
it on
saw them
rocks.
going to rocks. I feel like the thing is with what we're seeing in the next episode thing, it seems like the Davids have more fighting within them. And
Sad.
so it might be hard for them to like dig their heels in because I'm not sure they trust each other enough to go to rocks.
Yeah, and it seems like whenever Carl dislikes someone, they go home. So Carl dislikes Elizabeth. She goes. Carl is fighting with Gabby. Could be interesting, but Christian really likes Gabby, so maybe he saves her with an idol or something. But apparently next week is a 2 tribal council episodes, so we'll definitely know by the end of next week's episode who has the majority, or whether it's a 4-4 kind of thing or a 5-3 potentially. So it could be very interesting.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that interesting things will happen just because I feel like this is the part of the game where you really don't want it to slow down, because then if you slow down, then you have to speed back up really quickly in order to get to like a good pace for final tribal. So
yeah. Well, this was very exciting. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting, liking, and subscribing. We hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will see you on time, hopefully, for this next week's podcast. So either Friday or Saturday instead of our wonderful Sunday afternoon podcast. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you all next week.
bye.